Re-raise exception with a different type and message, preserving existing information. I'm writing a module and want to have a unified exception hierarchy for the exceptions that it can raise, e.g. inheriting from a foo-error abstract class for all the foo module-specific exceptions. This allows users of the module to catch those particular exceptions and handle them distinctly, if needed. But many of the exceptions raised from the module are raised because of some other exception, e.g. failing at some task because of an error on a file. What I need is to wrap the exception caught such that it has a different type and message, so that information is available further up the propagation hierarchy by whatever catches the exception. But I don't want to lose the existing type, message, and stack trace. That's all useful information for someone trying to debug the problem. A top-level exception handler is no good, since I'm trying to decorate the exception before it makes its way further up the propagation stack, and the top-level handler is too late. This is partly solved by deriving my module foo's specific exception types from the existing type, e.g. class full permission error, error, foo error, but that doesn't make it any easier to wrap the existing exception instance in a new type, nor modify the message. Python's PEP 3134, Exception Chaining and Embedded Tracebacks, discusses a change accepted in Python 3.0 for chaining exception objects, to indicate that a new exception was raised during the handling of an existing exception. What I'm trying to do is related. I need it also working in earlier Python versions, and I need it not for chaining, but only for polymorphism. What is the right way to do this?
Python 3 introduced exception chaining, as described in PEP 3134. This allows, when raising an exception, to cite an existing exception as the cause. The caught exception, exe, occur, thereby becomes part of, is the cause of, the new exception, a value error. The cause is available to whatever code catches the new exception. By using this feature, the __cause __ attribute is set. The built-in exception handler also knows how to report the exception's cause and context along with the traceback. In Python 2, it appears this use case has no good answer, as described by Ian Bicking and Ned Batchelder. Bummer.
You can use sys.exe_info to get the traceback and raise your new exception with set traceback, as the PEP mentions. If you want to preserve the old type and message, you can do so on the exception, but that's only useful if whatever catches your exception looks for it. For example, of course, this is really not that useful. If it was, we wouldn't need that PEP. I'd not recommend doing it.
You could create your own exception type that extends whichever exception you've caught. But most of the time, I think it would be simpler to catch the exception, handle it, and either raise the original exception and preserve the traceback, or raise new exception. If I were calling your code, and I received one of your custom exceptions, I'd expect that your code has already handled whatever exception you had to catch. Thus I don't need to access it myself. Edit. I found this analysis of ways to throw your own exception and keep the original exception. No pretty solutions.
I also found that many times I need some wrapping to errors raised. This included both in a function scope and sometimes wrap only some lines inside a function. Created a wrapper to be used to decorator and context manager. Implementation. Usage examples. Decorator. When calling do method, don't worry about indexer, just Myra. Context manager. Inside do2, in the context manager, if indexer is raised, it will be wrapped and raised Myra.
This is tangential, but when building consistent error messages for my own library, I found we were wrapping our own error messages as they percolated up. Was pleased to see that Python 3.11 now offers an add_note function to augment an existing error with additional information, which might also be useful. For Python 3.11, add_note. The add_note method is added to base exception. It can be used to enrich exceptions with context information that is not available at time when the exception is raised. The added notes appear in the default traceback. So we are now following this pattern.
If you want to support the channel, please consider liking and subscribing.